And with that, Donald J. Trump is once again officially the U.S. president, the 47th president of the United States, set to begin his second term. And in the speech he shared after his swearing in of oath of office, he promised to declare a national emergency on the southern U.S. border, a national emergency on energy, which would allow more drilling of oil in the United States. He also talked about issuing tax and tariffs on foreign countries to enrich Americans, creating the External Revenue Service, the Department of Government Efficiency. Also talked about creating U.S. policy where going forward only two genders will exist officially in the U.S., male and female. He talked about renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, as well as renaming Denali, the highest point in the U.S., back to Mount McKinley, as well as taking back the Panama Canal, expanding U.S. territory, and reviving the spirit of manifest destiny. So some big promises from Donald Trump, as he also says this is the start of another golden age, of the golden age for the United States. And to talk a bit more about this, we are joined right now by Lori Turnbull, professor and chair of the Public and International Affairs Department at Dalhousie University, Robert Russo, Canada correspondent for The Economist, former CBC parliamentary bureau chief, and Melissa Haussman, professor of political science with Carleton University. Hello to the three of you. And I'm going to quickly say that as we begin our discussion here, or at least continue our discussion, we're going to keep the box up so that we can continue to see what's happening in the U.S. Capitol, the day's events not yet done. But a lot to talk about here. But I want to begin with one of the last points he made, this idea of reviving the spirit of manifest destiny, expanding U.S. territory. Melissa, I'll begin with you since you're the newest on the panel right now. What's your reaction to that kind of promise from Donald Trump?
As an American, I varied between shaking my head and outright laughing at a lot of the things he said. Obviously, it sounds great to his base, but things like, we're going to retake the Panama Canal and we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico, none of this stuff he can do alone. So, it would be nice to think he's president of the world, but in fact, he's not. So, overblown rhetoric. Yeah, I'll stop with that.
Mm-hmm. Rob, what's your take on it? It piqued my interest in part because, of course, he's been pushing this idea of Canada as the 51st state. The vast majority of Canadians not in favor of that. So when you hear that kind of languaging, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I think that we finally got a little bit more of a peek inside the black box of the next Trump presidency, and I think it is filled with some bombast, but there are things there that Canada should pay attention to, and I think you're absolutely right. He did say that it's going to be an America that expands our territory. The only mention of expansion specifically was to Panama, but he has made it clear that he is prepared to not just mock us with the threat of expanding into Canada, but actually work at it and knowingly dividing us. And we are a divided country. We have some pretty wide fault lines in the country that are getting wider because of Mr. Trump. The suggestion that he would declare an energy emergency, however, I see as an opportunity for Canada. I know that the Canadian government has been down there talking about helping him become more of an energy superpower than the United States already is by supplanting some of the oil that the United States uses in its own country to project power overseas. So I was interested in that. Tariffs to enrich Americans. This is clear. He's making it clear that tariffs aren't just a trade weapon. He doesn't believe necessarily all the time that the United States is being treated unfairly in trade, but he wants to use tariffs to enrich the United States. But, just in terms of the bombast, if you listen to his speech, the United States is the dystopian hellscape. It can't provide for the health of its own people. It can't rescue them when they're in hurricanes. It's smothering free speech and allowing gangs of immigrants and trans people to terrorize Americans themselves. DEI is another smothering element of the United States, and yet when you looked in that room, there were very, very few faces of color. So a dystopian hellscape, and he thinks that he's going to be able to turn around that dystopian hellscape on day one. It'll be, as always, fascinating to watch.
Yeah, dystopian hellscape, as you say, as he lays out the challenges he says that he will take on. In fact, he talked about obliterating these challenges. He says they will be annihilated. Among them, for example, an education system that he says is hell-bent on teaching children to be ashamed of themselves. You know, Lori, I don't know which part of that you want to pick up on, whether it's the languaging around expanding U.S. territory or just the language in general that we're hearing from Donald Trump. What do you make of all this?
Right. I think he took a good chunk of the time to situate America as this hollowed out, almost failed state that is not performing basic functions, is not providing services in a timely manner. The healthcare system is problematic. There's not the right emergency response. He talks about like mistakes that he feels the U.S. state has made. He even talks about like back pay for people who lost their jobs because they didn't get vaccines during COVID. Like it's almost like he's got this long memory and he's going back and saying, I'm going to fix all these things, all these problems you have. And he's talking about the U.S. state as being the source of people's problems as opposed to something that's there to solve problems. And so I think it's in that context that he then starts talking about, of course, making America great again. And so in that context, he talks about expansionism. He talks about making America's relationships right. And so even though I think we're all kind of breathing a sigh of relief here that Canada was not mentioned and that we are not going to, it looks like we're not going to be hit with anything today, so we don't have to be in panic mode right now. But I don't think that we can really drop tools on this. I think that we're, and of course we're not. Of course we're going to continue to be vigilant on this. But there is clearly a sense that Trump, as Melissa said, he's not president of the world, but I think he thinks he is, and so he wants to make these decisions that are going to have huge impacts. He talks about taxing, the residents of other countries as though that's something he can do, and it's that simple. And so lots of big rhetoric.
Yeah, rhetoric, although, as you say, you can't drop your tools on this. Let's talk a little bit about tariffs, though, because for people at home, of course, that wasn't mentioned in the speech. There was no direct reference to tariffs against Canada, other than he does plan to impose some type of economic cost on countries who, as he puts it, profits from their business with the United States. And according to the Wall Street Journal, at least their reporting says that the tariffs that Canada has been concerned about, talking about since Donald Trump turned to social media weeks ago, they will not be immediate. In fact, it looks like what Donald Trump is going to do is direct his team to look into the situation with Canada, with the United States, also with China, to come back with the report, and then perhaps then we'll be looking at far more specific tariffs. But right now, as Lori said, not an immediate challenge, although expected to be down the road. But Melissa, I want to pick up a little bit more on the languaging being used here, because beyond this hellscape that Rob was talking about, he also talked about, he has a mandate to reverse a horrible betrayal of the United States, and he makes the argument, Donald Trump makes the argument, referencing the attempts on his life during the campaign, that he was saved by God to make America great again. Could you talk to us a bit about the power of that type of language to the American electorate?
Well, to the people such as I who understand the notion that the U.S. is a secular country and there's a separation of church and state, it holds no power whatsoever. To the people who might be persuaded to follow that kind of rhetoric, I suppose it sounds good. I found it particularly, frankly, offensive that one of the preachers invoked the language of the spirit free at last to describe the Trump administration and his threats/promises.